Thank you for coming today. I am so glad that you chose to be with me within the next 45 to 50 minutes that we have together on focusing on your destiny and trying to understand, God, what am I here for in my purpose? And trying to figure out, focusing with confidence, your story, how God uniquely designed you before you were even born for a purpose, in a purpose, right? And then trying to understand where we are. So before we begin, let's pray together. Father God, I pray today that this session is a revelation. I pray that it's a time for clarity. I pray for a time where we can see how we're uniquely made. I just pray that we learn how we're uniquely designed by you, Lord. Let us be confident in who you want us to be. Let us be confident that everything that has happened, our experiences and the events that has happened in our life, that is for a purpose, it's for naught, that you have a name for us. And I just want to thank you for your faithfulness. I want to thank you for your promise. I just pray that chains are broken and that clarity can see. I pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you so much in being here today. Hopefully that there is a worksheet. So this worksheet, I did mine in black and white, conserving paper. There is a handout that says refocus, focus on your destiny. So there's a handout that will have all the information that you'll need. So if not, it's okay. Pause the camera so you can print out your handout. So the handout, this is a working session together that we can coach together. So again, thank you. My name is Kendra Dodd, Kendra Q. Dodd, and I help people with breakthroughs. I help people with clarity. I help people understand their purpose. So I'm a career and life coach by profession or God, but most importantly, I'm a child of God, and I go by his word in everything that he does. So in the time that we have together, you will have a PowerPoint and you'll see it. So the next thing that we're going to talk about, when you think about the idea of who we are and whose we are, that there's a story. And so I want you to think about it. So what is a story, right? So when you think about what is a story, think about the stories. Growing up, my grandmother and the lady that used to keep me, her name was Miss Williams. And when I would get off the bus, she would talk about the soap operas. It was guiding light, right? And so they called those the stories, right? In this idea. And so what is a story? Just think about it. What's a story? And you can look on the back page and write some notes down of what is a story for you. And I Googled it and I searched, like, what is a story, right? To me, but what does the internet say about what's a story? So if you look, as you can see, a story has a plot, right? It has a line. It has a beginning, middle, and end. And there's a part, and there's characters, right, in a story that you have. So a story has a storyline, a beginning, middle, and an end at some time. There's a cliffhanger, right, that brings you up to that story. Also, when you think about a story also can be a false statement. So growing up as a little girl, my grandmother used to say, "Don't tell a story." Now, Kendra, don't tell a story. Are you telling a story? And what she was actually saying in her nice Southern way was, are you lying? Kendra, are you telling the truth? Now, there's a lot of times in stories that we see, from anything from Disney to cliffhangers, that there usually is a villain, right? An evil person. And I think we know who that is within the storyline in our lives and within the storyline within the Bible. And that one is trying to make us believe in false statements. That there's no truth, that he can tell a story and try to deceive us and what that truth really is, right? So it can be a false statement. A story can be a false statement. Also, a story really has to have an account of events, right? Like we said before, in the plot, meaning what's the plot? So we think about the plot of the Bible. It is overcome. Jesus come to save, right? In their beginning, in Genesis, there is a beginning and there's an end, and we know what that end is, and we're waiting for that day, right, when that happens. So there's an account of an event that we'll go through. And then lastly, when you think about a story, it's an evolution of something. It usually builds to something. Right? In this time, there's different stories. The story of our Savior, right? He's come to save, and we're ready for that, and everyone was ready. There's a story of his birth, right? There's beautiful stories that there's an evolution in how you get to that. So in that is all the concepts of a story if you think about it. So when we're going through that, it does follow with a purpose. Every story has a purpose. Even when I went to the movies with my kids, would you do this? This is just probably me. I would say, what did you learn out of this? What did you get out of that story, right? There's one or more characters, of course, in a story, and then they go through the series of events, and then by the end, it arrives at a target, right? A story arrives at this target. There's a destination. Something is fulfilled in a story, and it's a reason and why it's told. Every story, going up north, right? You used to go up north if you used to go on camps. I'm not from here, but in camps, they would tell stories. And what made a good story is like, wow, that's how the ending was going to be, right? That's amazing, or I wasn't expecting that. But there's a reason for it. Even Jesus, when he would tell his parables, had a reason for telling his story, and people would question what that is. And so when we look at it, let's look at the PowerPoint. You see it right there, is that in this, let's think about the greatest story told is with Jesus. But in this, in Psalms 139, 13 through 16, I'm using the Message version. It says, "Oh yes, you shaped me first inside, then out. You formed me in my mother's womb. I thank you, high God, you're breathtaking. Body and soul, I am marvelously made. I worship in adoration. What a creation. You know me inside and out. You know every bone in my body. You know exactly how I was made, bit by bit, how I was sculpted from nothing to something." Now, this is the part that I think is amazing. In this version, it says, "like an open book." I want to say that again. Like an open book. You watch me grow from conception to birth. All the stages of my life were spread out before you. So he knew before we came what our beginning, ending, what it was going to be, and the days of my life all prepared before I even lived one day. And that is just so amazing, because you know what? 2020 was hard. Was it hard for you? And things, you might have been knocked to the left, knocked to the right, and you're just like, God, why? Why? Why me? Why this? Why now? You might have lost your job. You might have lost loved ones. You might have gotten sick. Loved ones gotten sick. You were placed in a situation that you weren't sure your story and your destiny. And this is where we are going to spend time together to talk about that, to look at the big picture. Now, we're not God, and I'm not trying to play God in this. But I think if we just sit in knowing the Word, sit in looking at the stories in the Bible, we'll see, and you'll see maybe through this, and I've done this workshop before, that there is no mistake where you are right now. There is no mistake that you chose this. There is no mistake in anything that God has if you're in Him and for Him. And even if you're not sometime, He still provides grace. And that is what I'm trying to do here with this clarity as we're figuring out this storyline. Now, what's so great that I'm excited is I do this workshop in retreats. And so sometime we have more time together. What's beautiful about this is that you can press pause as long as you want, write, reflect, and think, and then press play again. Okay? So we'll go through each level and storyline. This is interactive. But this is great. You get to have one-to-one time where we can spend time together, where you can process through and see the storyline, what God has created for you. Through the story of even parts of my life, I will give you even some miraculous stories that people have told me going through this session. So let's begin together in this. So let's get out your handout. So as you're getting out your handout, I'm going to go through the next PowerPoint, and that is God knows our true story because He formed us. So if you feel confused, the first thing you go to is him. That is the first thing you think is God. That is, if you're confused, you don't know which way to go to him always, because he's the one that created you in this story. It can be hard sometimes, right, to know the meaning of our story, because you know what? His ways are not our ways. His thoughts are not our thoughts. Because trust me, I'm going to tell you right now, I was the most quieted. I'm still an introvert. If people that really knew me, I can't believe I'm doing this right now. But God, right? So his ways are not his ways, and his thoughts are not our thoughts. And just think about that in this. But when we start peeking through and looking at our storyline, you'll see themes. So let's go to, then we're going to start. We are on the content. So this is going to be our first part of what we're going to work on today. All right, so we're going to work on the contents of the information and where we are. So in this, I think it was amazing as I prayed through this and started this. As you can see, like in any story, you have a table of contents. And I like to flip to I look at the forward, and then you look at the table of contents and you see where it is. There are 7 chapters. I didn't make this up. I studied, okay, what are the different segments and stages of a person's life? And ironically, I ended up with 7. Now, I'm not into big numerology. 7, they're saying, is completion. 7, we'll look at the number 7 later in the time together. But there's 7 chapters and stages of someone's life. And the first stage does not start, if you think about the scripture, it does not start on the day you were born. It starts when God had decided the backdrop of when you come in. Have you seen a movie like that in a story where you come in and the backdrop? So the first part of the story that we're going to think about is before you entered into this world. What was the backdrop that, it said it has a story of events that set up? What was that backdrop? So there's a couple of things I want to say. So the next column you see, it says CEE. CEE, you're like, what do I see? We're trying to find clarity of God, what is my purpose? What is my destiny? Let's refocus so I can focus on that path. CEE is an acronym. It stands for significant. Okay. Yep. So you can write that down. Significant events and experiences. So that's what C, and I call them C moments, not SEA, but SEE. So C moments. When things happen, you're like, got it. Have you ever had an aha, like, oh, now I understand that purpose? So these are C moments and events. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through each stage, the 7 stages of someone's life. Now, some people, you might stop at a certain. If you're in your 20s or 30s, you're going to stop at a certain area. If not, we'll keep on going. The great thing about this, you can fast forward until you get to a certain stage, because there's a next phase step that we'll go through. But let's start with the first chapter. Oh, there's one other disclaimer that I want to say. I understand that everyone, this right here, it's okay to pause and pray. This right here also, you may not know all of your backdrop, okay? That's okay. Also, I understand that some people might have been in foster care. Some people may have been adopted. Here's the thing. God still designed you. God still made you for a reason and in this place. We're not a mistake by anybody. So even in that backdrop, even your adoption story, any story that you have, even in your foster care, leads you to now. So learning sometime in that, and that's why some people want to understand that. So I just want to say that don't remiss, still give yourself time, and it's okay to pray through even sections you don't know, even the section that we're going to start out now. So let's start. So the first one is chapter 1. It's the introduction. It's that backdrop, is what we talked about. It's that pre-birth to birth. So what we're going to do is I want you to think about, so that stage, that first stage that you had was pre-birth. So think about what was the backdrop before you were born. Now, I'm going to use, they're saying that Joseph is the best of all stories. When you Google it, they're saying the best of all stories in the Bible. I think everyone has an amazing story, but his story, I'm going to use Joseph's life in this backdrop. I'm going to give you sprinkles of my life. I'm going to give you sprinkles of other people's lives as well, because I've done this workshop. So I'll give you examples. Now, after each stage, pause, and I want you to fill out your section. So let's start with the first section. So pre-birth, birth. What are the things that were happening? What was happening in society? Remember, C moments, events, and experiences that were happening before you were born. Like, so for me, my little backdrop, my parents were young when they had me. Barely just getting out of the teenage stage and trying to get through. And my mother had just lost her dad. So all of these are very key points, right? She had lost him her junior year in high school. My father was going through some things, right? So here I am, right? Kendra arrived, right, in that, okay, through my parents. Now, let's think about Joseph. What's Joseph's backdrop? Do you know the story of Joseph? If not, I'll help you through. What was happening before Joseph was born? Well, first of all, you had his mother Rachel, right? And then you had his father Jacob. And before he was even born, if you think about it, he was out of prayer, tons of prayer, because his mother Rachel was barren for a while, to the point where she got jealous of her older sister. Also, when you think about Joseph's parents before Joseph came in and they prayed for him so long, Joseph's father waited 14 years to marry Rachel because his father-in-law Laban had waited. So first he fell in love. He saw Rachel, love at first sight. He went to, Rachel's father and said, I want to marry her. He said, okay, work 7 years for me and you can have her. Guess what? 7 years later, he tricked him. He married his older sister instead. He was like, I really love Rachel. Guess what? You're going to have to work another 7 years. So for this love that he loved Rachel so much, he worked 14 years. They finally get married. Everything's great, right? She couldn't have any kids. She got jealous of her sister. Some things happened. There was jealousy and it went back and forth and she finally had Joseph. And that became such an important, can you imagine praying and praying and praying for Joseph? All the love and the time and the wait for this. And finally, here comes Joseph. That is Joseph's backdrop. I want you to think about your backdrop. Okay, I've told you a little bit of mine. So pause, okay, and I want you to write in that C moment, what are some significant events that you know about? And if you don't, that's okay. You can continue going. What are some significant experiences with something going on? But what was the backdrop? Why did God create you to enter that family, your situation? Because God already knew before he decided to craft you bit by bit, like the scripture said, before you came in. So pause the button, give yourself as much time as you need, and write out and think of some significant events that you had. How was that? How did that feel? Anxious? Nervous? Uncomfortable? I know, this is hard. Maybe brought out some feelings. People have said that. I had one person, I want you to remember this story. I had one person that did this with me, and she said that when she came in and I debrief and think about it, she said, my mom, before I came in, my mom prayed. She said that her parents were on drugs. They were doing all kinds of things that was not living their life right. Her mother thought and prayed to God, if I have a child, maybe we'll become grown-ups. Maybe if I have a child, we become pregnant, we'll stop drinking, we'll stop doing drugs. Guess what? The prayers was answered for her mother, but her father didn't. And she said, well, I guess that didn't happen. I want you to remember that story, that one participant. But that's what she said when we went through that stage. All right, so that's just adding some more of people that's told me through this. All right, so let's do chapter 2. So chapter 2, let's think about that chapter and see moments, significant events and experiences through our life. This is now you're born. All right, so now you're born up into, it's time to, for us, grade school, right? Right before preschool, like 3 or 4 years old, so you're still learning, right? You haven't started formal training in elementary school. And so for me, I remember some things. We moved from where we are. At 4 years old, we moved to another location for me personally. That was significant because my great-grandparents actually watched me, and that was a wonderful experience and great memory. So I have an old soul kind of thing. Think about those things. All right, so let's think about Joseph. Let's use that storyline we had for Joseph. So that was a significant. My dad also, here's another thing for me at that time that was significant. My dad became a state trooper. So he became in law enforcement. So only did we leave, we went to a new town and everybody knew because then it was in the 70s. And my dad was one of the first two. They hired two at the same time in the 70s in the South, the first black state trooper in that county. So everyone knew my family was coming. We were in a fishbowl. So that's just in that, and probably even more so why I probably was very shy. All right, so let's go through. All right, let's look at Joseph's story. All right, so let's think through that. So Joseph's story, what happened with Joseph? Joseph, let me make sure I'm going through. So he's born. After he was born, his mom and dad was like, let's leave, it's time to go. Joseph's dad was like, let's go back home, because he actually had a lot of money. So why he was leaving and how he even ended up there with his mom was because he was running from his brother because he did things deceitful. All right, so he's going back home, and let's go through it. So he ran away. So here's the thing, though. When he left, he was trying to run away from his father, his father-in-law, because he didn't trust his father-in-law. So his father-in-law came back, found him and said, you stole some of my things. And he's like, I didn't steal anything. I'm an honest person. Don't you know, 14 years? He said, whoever stole out of my camp, I cursed them. Ironically, unfortunately, guess what? It was the love of his life. It was Rachel. Rachel stole. She stole it because she was mad. She wanted to get back at her father because he didn't give his inheritance. So you already know what type of father she had, right? In that. So he was trying to have a better life and get away from the drama of his father-in-law. And so remember, this is story by Kendra. So as you can see, that C moment, as he left, part of it, he was running away from his brother. Before he said, I go back home, his brother was trying to kill him, Esau. He said, I want to try to make things right. So here's a C moment for Joseph. He was heading back. He saw his dad and his uncle reconcile. So he understood the importance of family. That's a huge moment, right, of them forgiving each other. I want you to remember those storylines. He probably experienced that, okay? So pause. Think of some things up until infancy to preschool. What are some things that were happening in your life from the time you were born to preschool? I want you to think about things. Okay, press pause and we'll come back. How did that feel? Kind of hard? You're like, I don't know. I got to ask my brother. Did you pause the phone and call phone a friend? I don't know. But thinking through that, it can be very challenging. So through that, I had some people, I know I had someone in one of my other sessions and said, my mother passed away during that time. And we know that that story is going to happen to Joseph because Rachel was cursed, and God keeps his promises, unfortunately, and through those times, and especially in the Older Testament. So in that infancy stage in preschool, there's a lot that's going on. A lot has already happened that Joseph is probably witnessing, right? So he was born, he had his parents, they moved away from his very challenging grandfather, right? So all of this stuff was happening. He saw a reconciliation with his uncles of what's the right thing to do in relationships and how to go through relationships. He understands the consequences, right, of doing things that you aren't supposed to do. So a lot already by the age of 4. Give about. Don't quote me in this, okay? But through that time. So let's move to the next section. So we're in chapter 3 of our lives if we think about this, right? So we're in chapter 3 of our lives. Chapter 3 is really kind of from childhood, age 5, you're really starting to learn. There's a big difference. Do you have kids, right? If not, have you been around kids? I even have. So I have a 17-year-old. So I think this story, God must have said, Kendra, I want you to refine this story. I have a 17-year-old, a 13-year-old, you ready? And a 5-year-old. So if you don't know me, and I will tell you, even at church, because my kids are so much older, I was ushering, and I ushered for a while. And so someone at church, the youngest was sick, and I said, I can't usher today because I have to stay home with the little one. Well, everyone knew my older kids, and not until later, because my kids they really are big brothers and sisters. So I have a boy, girl, boy. And so someone said, oh, that child is yours? So it's a lot of times it's kind of funny that God continues to see through these stages and how we go through. So 5 years old, I'm seeing a really big difference. And this is my 3rd time around between 4 and 5 years old. And even more so now that he has older siblings. So think about this. So you have age 5, kind of your elementary school years, right? And thinking through this. So elementary, a lot happens in that time frame. So think about to age really 11, 12, so 5 to 11, 12. What was going on for you? A lot was going on for me, right? I'm still in a new town. I'm meeting new people. I was the shyest girl in the room. If you looked at me wrong, I would cry and they would just wonder. And there was a big age difference. So I was like an only child. My brother wasn't born until I was 8 years old, right, in that time frame. So you had that big gap as well. So a lot was happening personally for me, right? So I'm helping you think through this. So let's think about Joseph. Let's think about what was going on through his childhood. A lot has already happened, right? He's left. We know his backdrop. We know the love story between his parents and understanding that, right? You probably can tell me some more, right? There's some more things that we go through. He's seen, they've moved, and they've arrived, and guess what? He has become a big brother. Now, here's the thing. In this, he had other brothers. He had other older brothers. So can you imagine? So you had Leah. That's Rachel's older sister, and that's who his dad married. So can you imagine the family drama? So here's Joseph. Everyone's all excited looking at his story. Everyone is so excited. Jacob's excited, right? Rachel's excited. Probably some anxiousness, right, with this whole idea of this curse. So everything is fine. I'm making this all up, so give me some liberty in this story, okay? They're all excited. Everything's good. When will the curse happen? Everything's happy. Guess what? Rachel gets pregnant. And she's pregnant with Benjamin, okay? So everyone's good. I love Joseph. They had it. Rachel finally had it. The older siblings. Jacob's spending plenty of time. I want to make sure I go through this. And so guess what? Between this age, at some point, Rachel gets pregnant. And she's pregnant with Benjamin, and she dies during childbirth. Can you imagine what Joseph is going through? His parents are probably doubting over him. They're probably very excited over the fact that he has a baby brother. They understand the importance of it because he had his other half-brothers, right? And they talk about it in that sense, and they were much older. So here he is, their much older brother. He's like, I have a baby brother that I can play with. But he loses his mom at an early age, right? Some of you maybe already, I remember, during that time I lost my grandfather. Some of you probably around this age might have had death at this time for the first time for you. Or not at all, or not even death of a family member, but by then maybe if you had a pet, your parents had a pet, maybe experience that stage in your life. So here's Joseph, excited probably to be a big brother and have a brother that's closer to his age, and he loses his mom, which probably brought his dad and him even closer together, right, in this. I don't know, he might have even looked like his mom, to be quite honest, because in that backdrop, they said that Rachel was very beautiful. And if you look at the history, they said that Joseph was a very handsome man. So maybe he looked like that. So every time he saw Joseph, it reminded him of Rachel. And so they formed a very close bond. It was very clear that that was his favorite. They were both mourning over the grief of their mother. They were still trying to get back to Canaan, and I don't know the time frame. They made it very clear, but can you imagine what Joseph was going through at this time? He probably clung to his father, the need of his father, and losing his mother, and they spent quality time together. Now, with this, remember I said that Jacob, his father, had a lot of money. He was wealthy. Can you imagine being a son of a billionaire this time? So he's spending quality time with his father. And it even talks about his older brothers going out in the field. So can you imagine looking at every business transaction, things that are going on, right? Can you imagine being part of a billionaire and seeing how then to manage, right? So he probably understood. So he understood forgiveness. He understood family. Jacob probably told him the regrets of his life because he stole his inheritance to a certain degree, and his mom. So he learned a lot about integrity, honesty, truth from his father. Very, very close to his father during this time. okay? So during all of these adolescence of being a big brother, spending time with his father, his life was probably pretty good. His dreams probably started then, and he was like, so Joseph had dreams, probably told him, see, okay, I understand. So all of this is happening now, and life is just perfect. As perfect as it can be for losing your mom and through that praise, but that relationship with his father was just amazing. So what was going on in your elementary years? I was a daddy's girl. I remember going fishing. My dad actually would show me certain things, showed me how to use a police stick. Right? Yes, he did. Right? Certain things and you're going through during this time frame. Or maybe it was challenging for you. Maybe you weren't happy you had siblings if you were the oldest or you're the youngest. But I want you to pause and I want you to spend some quality time and think about what was going on from ages 5 to about 11 or 12. You know, your preteen times, right? Or kind of around that. I'll say you're elementary. I'll say 11 years old. Right? So pause, give yourself as much time as you need. There's no race of thinking through this chapter of your life. I'll see you in a minute. How did that feel? Maybe good, bad? During this time, I'll tell you, you may be thinking, oh, this is hard. Kendra, you're bringing up stuff I wasn't expecting to bring up. I had some people saying, okay, I see kind of Joseph's storyline. I'm seeing my line. I want you I want you to start looking at themes because that's on your next page. What are some things and patterns that you see? Because what you got to realize is Joseph is part of the 12 of the tribe that you'll look through in this lesson as we're going to fast forward if you already know the story of there's a purpose for all of this. See, the great thing is you know Joseph's story. The thing that's challenging is we don't know ours in that. So it's okay. The bad things that happen, and this is what someone's told me that's gone through this exercise, the bad things aren't the things in which you're supposed to hide. The test and the things that you thought you failed are not failures. It's just feedback. That's all it is. Those tests becomes your testimony, right, in that. And so don't look at that. And I hope that you're experiencing this time as a time to realize that, wow, God, maybe I needed that. Maybe you don't see it now, like in 2020. Maybe I didn't. But if you spend some quiet time with Him and really reflect on kind of the trends and the triggers we'll talk about that God has for you, you'll see that. All right, so let's move to chapter 4. So chapter 4 is our preteen. So that's kind of 12 years old, right? Entering into, you think you know it all, but you don't, right? Maybe interested in boys, girls, or whatever, right? You're interested in certain things. You think you know a little bit more. You want to be grown up. You're going through changes, right? Through that before you become a teenager. So we're going to stop just through our teens, so to 17. This is kind of that, you know, maybe you did have your own car, right? Maybe you're in junior high. Junior high, middle school was the worst time for me. I don't know if you had a great middle school, but middle school and high school time frame, right? Me, middle school, junior high, thank goodness for me, 6th grade stopped, right? So 6th grade was still elementary. I don't even know how kids do it that are in middle school because I still had some learning. So I liked being 6th grade for elementary. But for some of you, you might have been in middle school and junior high. Some significant times that I think about for me, thinking through middle school, junior high, is just certain things of getting past, this is going to sound funny, getting past wearing ponytails, right? Trying to like look cute for guys, right? When can I wear lipstick? When can I wear makeup, right? Mom, for me, I'm aging myself. When can you wear pantyhose, right? Is that transition for me? Boys, I don't know, I don't know. I'm not a boy, right? So think through some things, right, in that. So thinking through that. So let's think about Joseph. Everything's great, elementary, he's going through it. He's even learning more. His father is probably even allowing him to run some of the business. To the point, he was. Because if you think about it, his dreams get more vivid. He's telling his brother about these dreams that he has. He's trying to be engaged with his brothers. And his father would send him out to his brothers, probably not a good thing, supervision. And they probably didn't like that. So I will say that most of the time they don't have the age, and I did study this, is they said that So Joseph's dad gives him a coat, right? You know that, right? Technicolor made stories about it, musicals about it. So the relationship is getting stronger and stronger between the two of them, right? So 17 years old, his brothers are done. They're done with Joseph. They're done with the relationship. Okay, remember, these are significant events. They're done with watching this grow. They're done with his father handing over and him knowing more business than them because they're out in the fields. So here's Joseph showing up, and if you know, this is the climax to this part of his story. They were going to kill him, and they decided not to. So Reuben said, nah, don't do that. That's not the right thing. So someone spoke up, and they sold him. And if you actually look at the storyline of that, they said there's like an argument that he was sold at least like 4 or 5 times before he got to his final destination. And his final destination was the Potiphar's house. And looking at that. So he was sold 4 or 5 times. Could you imagine? His brother sells him, takes his jacket, right? They go through all this. They lie to the dad, right? Joseph don't know what happened or what's going on, but he's been sold, right? So here's a very privileged person that now he's in a place of why me? Maybe you were there last year. Maybe you've been there through your life. Maybe through college. Like you quit college. You're like in that like, nah, maybe college isn't for me. Maybe you changed your major 2 or 3 times, right? So because remember this time you're going through and you're thinking through what you want to do. So he was 17, sold, and end up at Potiphar's house, which is basically the captain to the Pharaoh god, and understanding that. Became a personal servant through those times. And then things were going well. He was, you could tell, he knew how to be a good servant, right, to his father, and knew how to listen. He was open to coaching and feedback, and that's how he probably grew in Potiphar's house. He was seduced by Potiphar's wife, and he was truthful. He just said, no, you're married, right? So he learned a lot of virtues from his father. If you think about that, right, all the things that he had, didn't learn it from his brothers, but definitely learned it from his fathers, right? And thinking through that, so he was falsely accused. And usually, now this is very interesting about this storyline. Usually, so here's the thing, Potiphar's wife had done this before. False accusation of accusations of rape. Usually that meant death. Now, something had to be done, so Potiphar actually went to the Pharaoh and asked for a petition. Don't kill him, let's put him in prison. So grace was given actually to Joseph in this time. Let's think about themes. I want you to start thinking of themes and start like highlighting some things as you go through. Grace was given to Rachel. There's a theme of grace in here. Grace was given to Jacob with his brother Esau. Grace was given that Jacob could even go away, right? So let's think about what are some C moments, what were some significant things that happened to you during your preteen and teenage years. What were some significant experiences, events, that happened? Maybe you learned how to make some mistakes. Maybe you consumed things you shouldn't have. Maybe you were doing things in this search that you shouldn't have. But that's okay. I want you to still go through what are some significant events or experiences that, this is only for you. Here's the thing. This is for you. I'm glad that we can have this time together personally. You can get into your closet and this is just me and you. And really, whatever you're writing is between you and God. So I want you to really be truthful, and maybe you don't want to write it out, but write it out. Writing does something as well. There's something in that in writing and journaling I highly recommend. But write those things out that were significant, right? What were those C moments during that time? All right. Pause and come back. How did that feel? Oh, I think you get a little bit more liberties, maybe a little bit more stumbling blocks. Maybe a little bit more experiences, maybe a little bit more things that you hadn't thought about in a long time, maybe. But here's the thing. His grace is sufficient, and he already knew you were going to do it. He already knew that you were going to process through all of this. So don't feel bad about this. This chapter right here is very interesting. I actually had a participant that was going through this, and she was crying, and I asked her why she was crying. She said, I burned my house down. That's when we lost our house. And I said, how old are you? I think she was in her teens. And I said, whose narrative are you going to believe? And she started crying. And I said, why are you crying? She said, well, I don't know if I burned the house down. See, here's the thing. Remember we talked about a storyline that we can believe our narrative, and sometimes we're worse. We can believe God's narrative, because here's the thing in the story. God, everything he does is for our good. Everything he knows we're going to do. Let's bring in another Bible character, Jonah. David, right? God's favorite. David was God's favorite. And David did some things like Bathsheba that he shouldn't have done. God already knew. So let's go back to this participant that I had. And she started crying. And I said, what? She said that this is what happened. Because remember what she originally said. She said, I burned down my house and we lost everything. And I said, I don't believe that, right? Of that. And I said, this is what happened. She said she smelled smoke, and smoke was really bad. And she said she ran throughout the house, and she was saying, it's smoking, it's smoking. Everybody, I think the house is on fire, the house. Just in enough time, everyone ran out the house. So all this time, this was, I would say, safely she was in her 40s. All this time. So you know what happened? Her siblings and her family said, what did you do? Because they didn't smell the smoke. They didn't see the smoke. So therefore they thought, and they accused her, you had to do something. What did you do? And she said, nothing. So they continued saying, I know you did. I know you did. To the point where here she is today, right at that moment in this retreat saying, I burned down my family's home. She's assumed a lie that's not even true of that narrative. You know what the true narrative is? She saved her family. How freeing is that? So when you hear certain lies of failures that you did, they're not failures. Or things that happen, especially during that time, they're not. And if you think God doesn't forgive you, he does. But I want you to look at the themes that are happening in your life, just as we're kind of going through the themes that are happening in Joseph's life, that nothing surprises God. That nothing is a mistake. Now, God does give us choices. He does, right? He gives us free will. And then he directs us in those free will. Let's think about Jonah, right? I'm not going to Nineveh. And then some things happened, right, through progress. But we're going to stick with Joseph. We're going to stick with Joseph's story. But I want you to think about that, okay, as we process through with that. So I just wanted to say that. So as we're thinking through where we are now, all right, let's take a little break and let's pause. All right, so now we're at stage 5, early adulthood. All right, so we're out of the teenage years, we're out of that. So early adulthood. For me, I went off to college. There were some things that happened. Personally, we can talk about, but there's some reconciliation. There's some things that happened in my family that was significant for me that went on. But let's think about Joseph. Let's talk about Joseph. What was happening? He's in prison. Now, one thing we know about Joseph is he's loyal, he's faithful, and he's coachable, right, in that, and everything that he's learned being at his father's feet. So he's in prison, ends up being in charge of the prisoners. So here he is with leadership capabilities. He starts getting these dreams. So the cupbearer and the chief baker of the Pharaoh got in trouble and they end up in prison. So Joseph can interpret dreams as well. So the cupbearer and the chief baker ended up having these dreams. Joseph interpreted the dreams, and then they ended up back at the Pharaoh. And Joseph's like, okay, you know what? I helped you out. Can you kind of get me out of prison? They're like, yeah, I got you. And they forgot. It took 2 years. 2 years. And the only reason they remembered, right? How many times have that happened to you? The only reason they remember is because the Pharaoh was getting these dreams and people couldn't get it right. And then they're like, oh yeah, there's this guy in prison. So Joseph came, interpreted the dream, and guess what you get to hear? Remember 7 with his father and 7 in 14 years? 14 years. 7 years, a year of abundance. 7 years, it'll be a year of famine. So in that abundant 7 years, you need to plan and get ready for the famine. And he was like, got it. All right, I want you to take care of that. So Joseph, here's the story, ended up managing those 7 years of abundance. So things were great. He was second in command. Joseph ended up being second in command. So he's second in command, right? So he's summoned, he's working on the surplus. So this is all his adult life. Everything is going good, right? He's gotten over all this stuff in prison. That's in the tabloids. That's all old stuff. Okay, you see I added a little modern century to that. But that's his early adulthood. So what are the things that happen in your early adulthood? So press pause, right, in that and think of what are some key moments. So you're talking about your 20s, right? So what are some things? Now, if some people are not there yet, remember you can fast forward if you're, or just in your 20s, but at least do your 20s, okay? So this is in your 20s. You can get into the early 30s, okay? So press pause. I'll see you in a minute. How was that? 20s were kind of fun. Until I started hitting into the 30s. I met my husband in my 20s, in my late 20s, and, I was on my own. I bought my own first house in my 20s. So those were significant events that I, at least was maybe making some things right for my teenage years. So now we're at chapter 6, right on your form. So chapter 6, let's think about chapter 6 is middle adulthood. So we're looking at, mid-30s, 40s. So middle adulthood, now we are midlife crisis for some people. So that's a bigger range, but things don't move as much. Maybe you have kids, maybe you had kids in your 20s, maybe you just started kids. So I'm right at that cusp for me, for my kids. So by then, Joseph's second in charge. He's doing pretty well. He marries the priestess daughter, right? He has 2 sons, so he has a family now. He becomes so big, he gets a name change. So he is now indoctrinated in the entire Egyptian culture. It's like he's been given a second, fourth, fifth, I don't know how many times you'll say it. I don't know. He said cats have 9 lives. He had several grace, if anything, is the theme. So he is definitely the businessman. He planned out, okay, when the famine comes, people are going to be coming to us. So what do? Okay, this is what we do. We make it like a tax. People are coming with nothing, so they have a famine. So whatever they produce, we get a percentage of that. So the idea of that, he is an awesome businessman from his daddy. He gets it from his daddy. He's in his 30s. He hides his identity to a certain degree of who he was. And then guess what? Within the second year of the famine, his brothers show up. So here they are. They can't remember. Remember, he's 17 years old. They don't remember who he is. And he said, you know what? I want you to bring, he wanted to check on his baby brother, Benjamin, in that. And one of the things I didn't say in Benjamin that he watched is he's watched his mother become bitter. Before his mother passed away, too, and taking care of Benjamin and probably wanting to make sure he was okay, his mother gave Benjamin originally a very bad name. It was as if Benjamin's fault. And maybe he witnessed that. Maybe he heard that. And his father said, Jacob was like, no, we're going to give him this name instead. So I just want you to remember these things that Joseph maybe had. So he tested them. He wanted to make sure his brother was okay. They didn't know who he was. And so in this, at the end of the day, during this time frame, he gets reunited with his father. And it was amazing. And they were saying, oh, and there was forgiveness. Had seen that before? Are you having some light bulbs come off? Like, he knows what forgiveness looks like. He knows what loyalty, he knows what family looks like. He knows what honor looks like. He knows how to make amends. He knows what that looks like. And he's reliving it in his own story, right, within those themes. So I want you to think about if you're in this time, if you're still with me, if you're in your middle adulthood, what are some things that's happened? You've lost a job. You've maybe hit bankruptcy. You maybe lost a child. Maybe you had some infertility problems. I've been there. That's why I was told I could never have kids. But God. A lot of things might have happened by now, right? In this story and what it was and what that truth is. And that storyline and what that looks like, okay? So I want you to think about that. Press pause, and I want you to come back. And it goes a little bit faster because I don't know how many people are in their 30s, but pause as long as you want and come back, all right? See you in a minute. Some people have probably, or maybe not, have made it to the stage 7 or chapter 7, and that is later adulthood. I haven't made it there myself yet. But what I'll tell you is that just as Joseph's storyline is amazing, yours will be too. You know why I know? Because God is faithful. That's how I know. That even though I haven't lived, I'm still in my chapter 6. I haven't entered into my chapter 7. But if God lets me see chapter 7, I know that it still is going to be enough where I can give him praise and glory. So let's look at Joseph's chapter 7. He helped his family. They're successful. For 17 years, they were successful in spite of the famine. So they all came. Everyone came, and they were saved. In this also, through this, Jacob is Israel now. When he actually reunited with Esau and made things right, that's when God made him Israel. So he's Israel, and Jacob dies later. Jacob's 100 and something years old. Who knows how old Joseph is then, right? So he dies, and Jacob blesses not only Joseph, but Joseph's sons. He blesses all of his sons. Everyone is back together in family, and God does love family and reconciliation. So Jacob dies, and then eventually, we know the end of the story, Joseph dies. And Joseph said that whenever the children of Israel, children of Jacob, whenever they leave, take my bones with you. Guess what? In that and whatever, even after us, even after I'm gone, I want to make sure I'm leaving a legacy for my children. So even the storyline that you have before you come in, my children's children, my children's children's children, through the things that I do through my children, and anyone, if you don't even have children that you interact with, there's a legacy that you leave. So guess what? Moses kept that. Before he left, he did take Joseph's bones when they left. And that's the story, if you look at it, of Joseph's life and his destiny. And so if you look at the next page that we have, I want you to now look at all your chapters of your C moments. And I want you to circle. You can do different colors. I love colors and highlighters. And I want you to highlight certain themes that you saw in his life, right? Or even, not his life, but your life. I think some of the things, so themes and links, themes that you saw, reconciliation, grace. You saw grace several times. You saw that themes that business always came up and how you were like, well, how did I end up teaching? Guess what? I said I never wanted to be a teacher. Guess what my mom was? Teacher. I would never do community service. Guess what? I won an award from the state of South Carolina for community service. Guess what? When I was in college, I won a national award for community service. Right? And looking at that, there's honesty, there's movement, there's fleeing. For some reason, they like to go away and run from drama. There's trust. There's true love and what love will do. There's the idea of patience, right? Jacob waiting. There's the idea of patience. Joseph waiting in prison, waiting for good things to happen. There's deceitfulness in this story, and there's jealousy. There's the brothers that were jealousy, and guess what? Rachel was jealous of his sister. There's some things happen, right? So there's strongholds. So I want you to look at those themes that are happening in your life. So I want you to pause and wait some time, and I want you to go back and pray through and what are some themes that you're seeing that God is building this story? Remember, a story builds up and what that is. All right, so let's pause and let's look at those themes. So now in those themes, there were probably some good things like strongholds that may be generational, and you also can see some bad things, good and bad. So I want you to look at that and say, through all of that, where did you see God's grace in your life? Through all of that, what grace did you see through that process? So press pause. I want you to write down what that grace is, right? And then we'll come back. Okay, so last you have triggers, right? So what are some triggers? So for Joseph triggers, he had deceit, right? Testing of his brothers, going through favoritism, right? So seeing the trust in all. So now that you have all those three things, I want you to think about, what is your story? Is it freeing that you know that God will be faithful? You know that things are good. You know that his grace is sufficient. But realize, what are the triggers? Like the triggers in Joseph's lineage was favoritism created deceit. They didn't like that. So knowing what your triggers are, knowing how to deal with it, and then praying to God of what that storyline is very, very important. All right? I'm very proud of you in doing this work today. I am. I want you to close out in prayer. If you want to reach out, you can in that, but let's just close out in prayer. Father God, I just thank you for this time today. I just thank you for the clarity. I thank you for going through the stages. I thank you for giving you clear stories in the Bible so we can follow through, that we can see that we don't have to be perfect, that we know that everything is for a purpose. Thank you for the greatest story through Joseph in your life and through other people's lives as we process through. I just thank you for this time. Oh, and by the way, let me end up with this story. Remember that young lady that said that her parents prayed, that her mom prayed that, hey, if I get pregnant, maybe we'll become saved and we'll do better? Guess what? At the age of 13, she's the one that brought her father to Christ. So even though her mother's prayer was not answered then, God heard it. And right now, that woman, she's an international speaker and saving millions of people. So just because your prayer wasn't answered then, if it's in earnest, God will hear you in his time. His ways are not your ways. Remember that. Thank you and have a blessed day.